So this was the minimal pipeline that was created. It did only take um, about 5 minutes because it was based on just doing very simple, no actual code. It's just the pipeline. But what you do get from that is the great structure that practically every application needs anyway. To build it, or compile it, test it, do a preview of the application. That's popular these days to have sometimes it's called a pull request preview or an instant preview. Jenkins popularized it very early on in the DevOps days. Um, and then obviously a deploy stage. Um, the syntax, depending on whether you're using GitLab, Bitbucket, GitHub, etc., varies, but they all basically do the same thing now anyway. So if I just jump to the code for this pipeline, it's not a lot different from when you create a new repo. In fact, when I created this, I just used the initial template, but then deleted most of it and then refactored it slightly for this demo. So we've got the build, stage, test, PR deploy, sorry, PR preview, and then deploy. What's for me confusing about GitLab syntax compared to GitHub's is how they relate to each other, how these names of things relate to each other. A big important takeaway is line 7 to line 11, the stages. This does impact the order of events. So build will run first, then test, PR preview, then deploy. And this is taken from the initial documentation. So a pipeline is composed of independent jobs that run scripts grouped into stages. Stages run in sequential order. So the sequential order for here would be build, test, PR preview, and deploy. But jobs within stages run in parallel. And this is for me where it gets confusing with the syntax. Everyone has their favorites. Other providers like GitHub, Bitbucket express this in different ways. But let's go back to the picture of the pipeline. Notice that these two are on top of each other. That's because they run in parallel. But not immediately obvious why for me if you read this. But let's just break that down. So the reason that they're above each other is because of this line here on line 20 and line 26. So because these jobs are within the same stage, they run in parallel. It's not often that you can do that, but because these two jobs can run independently of each other at the same stage, we can. So a lint job won't impact a unit test job, which is why they can run at the same. I'm trying to think of another example. I can't right now, but there might be other things that you want to do all at the same time that don't compete with each other. But obviously you can't do do a deploy without building it. You have to build it first before you can deploy it, etc. But in terms of readability, it's not as though you can just read from top to bottom. You do need to read from top to bottom, but also take note of the stage keyword, because depending on how the author writes pipelines, they might choose to put this right at the bottom. It's quite nice at the moment because all of the stage test part are grouped together. But depending on how sloppy you are with writing your pipelines, you've got to be really quite careful with the eyes to make sure you see how they're written. That's why it's always useful to create a simple empty repo just to visualize the pipeline as you want it to be. And preview the pipelines. So I hope that's a good overview. Really just an emphasis on syntax, specifically to GitLab pipelines and how stages impact the sequential order. And then jobs and then jobs within stages. I think what's confusing is how these are called jobs, but then because there's multiple jobs here within a stage, it's sort of an overloading of terms, which for me can be quite confusing. But once you get that link between the stage names and how that groups them for when you want tasks to run in parallel, which you might not always want, it's a nice feature.